People in the media are always like, you're native, like what kind of foods you grew up with? Because they want to hear a cool story, like, oh, I'd get up in the morning, take down an elk with a slingshot I made, would have a big family feast, But that wasn't the reality, because like I grew up with the commodity food program because we were poor like a lot of people on the reservation, and it's just the way it was. And we didn't even have the pretty cans when I was growing up. We just had black and white cans, just beef and juices, and that's dinner, and that sucks. But because we could do better than this. There's so much more to learn and more to offer with indigenous foods. We have 634 tribes in Canada, 573 in the US, and 20% of Mexico identifies as indigenous. So there's an immense amount of indigeneity out there today, and we should be celebrating that diversity because it's awesome. We are the stewards of what's left of this diversity, and a lot of it got wiped off the map in the 1800s with all that colonialism that was going on. If we can control our food, we can control our future. And for us, it's an exciting time to be indigenous because we are taking all of these lessons from our ancestors that should have been passed down to us, relearning them, and utilizing the world today with everything it has to offer and becoming something different. Now, this is an indigenous evolution and revolution at the same time. Hi, my name is Sean Sherman. I am here in Minneapolis, Minnesota at our restaurant Owamni. I am the executive director and founder of our nonprofit Natives, which is North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems, and my brand, the Sioux Chef.
So Sean, where are we today?
So we're in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we're right outside of the Mississippi River. And it's a really special location. In the Dakota language, it was called Owamni because there used to be this massive waterfall right outside this window. And it used to be about 300 feet across and about 40-foot drop. And you can kind of see the water levels when you're looking out at the river from here to there. Here at the restaurant, when we named it Owamni, we just took the short name of the original namespace of what is around this waterfall area. And the original waterfall is no longer here because during the colonial history, a lot of mills popped up in this area and a lot of tunnels and things were drawn, and it ruined the natural features of the waterfall. So we see a lock and dam and some concrete skirting. But this is still a really special place, and that's where we are.
And what does Owamni mean?
Place of the falling, swirling water.
So this is your restaurant here. You
Yep.
started this restaurant, and it's won a bunch of awards. It's gotten a bunch of acclaim. What makes this different than other restaurants in the Twin Cities?
Well, we wanted to feature kind of our vision of modern indigenous food, and we leaned into the philosophy that I'd been utilizing for quite some time. So the philosophy was basically, in order to showcase what are indigenous foods to North America, we took away colonial ingredients. So we removed things like dairy, wheat flour, cane sugar, beef, pork, chicken, and just really focused on what was here first and built entire menus around that. On top of that, just featuring indigenous products from indigenous producers first, because we want to make sure our food dollars are intentionally going to who we want to support. So it's just a unique and different restaurant, and we believe that there should be Native American, indigenous restaurants all over, everywhere. But unfortunately, this is something super unique, but we're very proud of what we built.
I've heard you sometimes refer to the food that you serve as ironically foreign.
You're right. It's true. because a lot of people are very unaware of so much of, especially the botany around us. I feel like proteins are easy because any animal you could eat. Don't recommend all of them, but it's possible because that's protein. But as far as the vegetation and botanicals go, the Western diet's kind of ignored so much of what is just this amazing bounty of what is in North America. And indigenous diets are really focused on a lot of that plant diversity, and we really highlight and showcase a lot of that in our menus today.
So it's foreign because it's foreign to many people who haven't grown up eating it.
Absolutely. And because our Western diets are really obviously industrialized, and it's a part of the just what's in the grocery store, that's where food comes from. But, from an indigenous perspective, when you look outside, there's just food all around us constantly if you know what to look for, And I think that's part of the education that we're attempting to highlight through the food, is just showing that there's so much plants, so much diversity, so much health and nutrition that's all around us, and that we could really be looking at the regional and cultural differences all over what is the United States and North America and beyond.
So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to talk to you, is because it's not just about serving a delicious meal. That is a part of it, but that's really a way to get people in and thinking about some of these much bigger issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's food with story, you know. So I think when you have food with story, it's really powerful, and that's what we attempt to do because we change the menu quite consistently. We usually change them around the solstices and equinoxes because those are very definitive, like seasonal changes, you know. But we just want to showcase like what's seasonal, what's local, what's regional, what's coming from indigenous producers, what's wild, and just like telling all that story through the plant. Because again, there should be Native American restaurants everywhere, especially in the U.S., because no matter where you are, American history starts with Native American peoples, and we're typically completely left out of that whole situation, you know. And food is such an important storyteller. Food is something that people can connect with, and you know, we just see it as an amazing tool.
The fact that there aren't Native American restaurants and the fact that there is not a lot of knowledge of indigenous cuisine, it's not accidental.
No.
It was a very conscious program to try and erase indigenous history, to try and erase Native American culture.
Yeah, the erasure of indigenous peoples in the Americas has been something that's been ongoing for quite a while. You know, so you can date that back to, you know, the beginning of colonization, you know, back in the late 1400s, and with Christopher Columbus, you know, who never actually stepped foot in what is the United States today, but is still like highly revered, right? But again, you know, I focus mainly on just the United States government because that's where we live today, and it's a short history of the United States government, you know, because they don't form until the very late 1700s, and even in the 1800s and the early 1800s, like the majority of what is North America is still under indigenous stewardship, as it always had been. And during that time period, many indigenous communities hadn't even seen European people yet. And so I look at that one century of 1800 to 1900, which is extremely aggressive, extremely violent, extremely racist, and so many really awful things happened to indigenous peoples during this push from the American government to push westward and to take over a lot of that land space. And growing up Lakota on Pine Ridge, like, you know, it's only a couple generations ago, because my great-grandfather, for example, was at Battle of Little Bighorn when he was 18, and like my grandparents were the first generation of kids to have to go through assimilation processes through boarding schools, to cut their hair, to learn English, to learn Christianity, and to basically be stripped of culture completely. You know, so a lot of those pieces are a part of the story of why we don't see Native American restaurants everywhere. And you know, when you look at the 1900s onwards, they're still living in segregation, living in oppression, living in poverty, and all these things are manufactured, you know, because we were just basically put onto reservation systems, which are still segregated communities today. And there's just been a lot of issues there and very little work, you know.
And why food as a way to push back against that whole history?
I just feel like food is something really powerful, and food sovereignty is what we really push towards, because if we can get tribes to really consider that there is a path to control their own food, to be able to grow their own food, to harvest their own food, to preserve their own food, to make more than enough food for their entire community with the spaces that they have, and even in all the different environments all over the United States, there's plenty of ways to work towards that. And I think that if we can control our food, we can really control the power that we have for our future, you know. And so I just really hope people can see that we can learn so much from our ancestors, because we're not trying to create food that's a museum piece and trying to go backwards to 1491 of what were we eating long before European settlers showed up. We're looking at the future of like, how can we adopt a lot of the knowledge base from our ancestors, apply that to what we know today, and how do we think about the future? Because we have every single day we're alive, we can think about changing the future.
Something that I think is really inspiring to me about your work, and also really interesting, like intellectually too, is that a lot of people have this interest in the kind of food that you make, right? Like food that is more connected to a healthier past, to less processed, to not including all these dangerous additives. But a lot of the people who are most interested in that also don't have a curiosity about the context and the history of it.
Right.
And the thing that I love about you is that you are both making this really delicious, important, nutritious food, but you're insisting on the history and the context of where it came from and what it means.
I just think, you know, history is so important, and unfortunately, if we grow up in America, we don't learn about American history. You know, we are taught a very colonial approach to that story, and there's nothing that really addresses a lot of the hardships that other people go through if you don't happen to be a white Christian male, particularly. And so there's a lot of issues in American history that get blown over, and we're living in a time period where it's very political, where there's a lot of political figures trying to erase further people of color and the histories that we have gone through just to be alive today. So especially when we're looking at Black and Indigenous and American history, like our histories are in danger of being erased all the time, as they always have been. So I think it's really important to talk about history because we can really learn so much. And it's not trying to make people feel bad for what happened in history, because history can be really painful. It's just addressing it for what it is, naming it for what it is, and identifying the trauma that's been created from a lot of these histories.
I'm talking to you right now in a moment in the United States when one of the central political issues right now is the question of who is allowed to be here.
Yeah.
And who is supposed to be here.
Exactly.
And that obviously is something that you have been thinking about for a long time, of who is allowed to be on this land and who is supposed to be on this land.
Absolutely. I mean, because I just feel like, when you understand history, like colonial borders are these made up lines, and, governments are, holding on to colonial powers, because colonization is just the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and just exploiting it economically, right? And so when you look at colonization, it's happened all over the place. And, our governmental systems all over the world, but especially in the Americas, are built to support that colonial mindset of continuously just like ruining the environment, moving around people of color, dividing people by race, dividing people by religion, and all these principles that really have no values when it comes to what does it mean to be a human, because as humans, like, we should all understand how connected we are, because we all live on this planet. We all should understand how the environment affects us and is a part of everything that we do. And if we look at indigenous values of things, like it kind of understands a lot of those pieces of that close relationship to plants, to environment, to the protection of clean water, things like that are just basic human rights, But, the colonization and the capitalization that's out there, like the people in charge want to keep that power. But we just see like the Americas is a beautiful space with so much amazing, beautiful indigenous diversity. And we should really embrace that diversity and learn how to try and protect it instead of trying to homogenize it constantly. That's been going on for a few hundred years now.
So there are hundreds of Native American tribes.
There's 574 in the United States, 622 in Canada, and 20% of Mexico identifies as indigenous. But there's obviously way more indigeneity down there because you could just see it in the DNA.
And so when you think about what it means to have a Native American cuisine or a Native American dish, is that even possible? Or is it a specific like Lakota dish? Or
you can have very specific tribal dishes because a lot of tribes come from very specific regions, obviously, so when we look at that beautiful diversity of not only what were people eating, but how did their culture affect that a little bit, because there could be different groups from different tribes speaking different languages, utilizing the same region with some of the same ingredients, but they have different cultural intentions with how their food is, and meanings behind certain things too. So it's important just to understand the beauty of all of that diversity, because like North America, which has been our main focus of basically looking at Mexico through Alaska and just looking at all that beautiful diversity.
And what's a colonial ingredient?
Ranch dressing.
Okay, hard to argue with that.
When we're identifying what's colonial, we're talking about things that were introduced to the Americas that didn't exist here before, which is, again, like why we removed things like wheat flour, which wasn't from here, dairy products, because dairy in the Americas was for child rearing. So, and most people lose the enzyme to break down lactose by the time you're like 11 or 12 anyways, because we just, in our DNA, just didn't have the ability to keep producing those enzymes. And, things like cane sugar and just things that were introduced to the Americas. And so we look for what's here, we look at the proteins that were here, which is all the animals, like wild animals, fish, birds, insects, anything that people were eating for protein. But then we're also looking at vegetation of all the wild knowledge of plants, because there's so much cool stuff out there all around us, because just like where we are in the Great Lakes, we have all sorts of edible parts of trees and roots and flowers and herbs and moss and lichens and all mushrooms and all sorts of things that are out there. And then we also look at the agricultural aspect, because there's a vast area of North America that was really highly advanced in agriculture for so long. And we do learn the story of how indigenous peoples here taught the colonizers how to farm with their agricultural practices, which becomes a global situation eventually. And people take that for granted. Of a lot of the foods that came from the Americas have been normalized all across the globe, because like what is Italy without polenta or chocolate or vanilla or any of those kinds of, or tomatoes or chili peppers, in many parts of the world. So it's just exploring for us, like, what is indigenous and how do we want this to be perceived for the future? Like, how do we want future generations? And for us, we're holding on to the health aspect, because by removing those colonial ingredients, the food, like everything at this restaurant is gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, soy-free, pork-free. And it's like what every fad diet's trying to get to, and it just happens to be the indigenous diet of North America.
Growing up on Pine Ridge Reservation, what was the kind of food that you were starting with, and how did you use that start to get to where you are now?
Well, I mean, we grew up in a very segregated and colonial state, and like we were separated from a lot of the rest of the U.S. because we're so rural, and I grew up out in the middle of the country, so we spent most of our time outside, and I was mostly a product of a lot of commodity food and the FDPIR program coming out of the USDA, so we just had a lot of cans of government foods, like canned vegetables that are packed in sodium, canned fruits that are packed in corn syrups, literally just gallons of corn syrup to utilize as a sweetener, and just like and just a lot of empty carbs, powdered milks, and just a lot of stuff that's just not great for us, a lot of overprocessed foods, and it's led directly to a lot of these health issues that we talk about.
We've been talking about how this food is not historic, it's not a museum piece, it's very much at the present. And part of that is, I'm interviewing you right now in a working restaurant, right? Yeah. There's a working kitchen right over there. We can hear and see people working.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been very lucky that this vision has really worked out as well as it has. And, we've basically have been sold out every single night since 2021. And, so it's been an amazing just project to see come alive. And we're very happy that it exists. And we just hope that it has ripple effects of more influence out there in the world.
So when I first interviewed you, for the show, you were just getting ready to open this restaurant, to open Owamni. How has it been since then? What's been happening?
I mean, we've gotten a lot of success. We've won some major awards, like Best New Restaurant in the United States by James Beard, which is a huge national award to win, because there's a lot of cool restaurants that open up every year. But to pull that top prize without ranch dressing, I thought was a pretty big accomplishment,
That's normally what James Beard is looking for.
Exactly, right? And we've been really proud of the massive team that we've built and the skills that we're building, the chefs that have come out of here. And we just opened up the doors for so much creativity, and I've been able to step away from, cutting vegetables up in the back to continuing to do this larger work and just really see a super competent, amazing team grow out of this. And we just have visions of doing this more and more as we grow.
So you're both expanding your own personal world of indigenous food. You're starting a new restaurant in Bozeman, Montana.
Yeah, so everything, even this restaurant, is a part of our nonprofit, so we kind of use the restaurant as a tool. Restaurants will never create food relief or even food access for that matter, because restaurants are a privilege, because you need money to come to a restaurant, and not everybody has money, so the purpose of this restaurant wasn't to feed people in need, because we have other projects for that. But why this restaurant is part of a nonprofit is because restaurants do create a lot of jobs, which builds a lot of skills, creates a lot of future leaders. And then it also, because of our intention of who we purchase from and who our food dollars are going to, because we try and purchase from local and regional indigenous first, and then national indigenous, and then support, local BIPOC, so we have a tier of how things flow, of where our money goes to. And we're just seeing a lot of good where our food dollars are happening, because we're pushing over $500,000 a year just to indigenous producers alone with this restaurant, with this one kitchen. And so the vision was to continuously grow. So the nonprofit's really focused on not only creating access to these foods and creating these projects and creating jobs, but also creating a lot of education and working towards education sovereignty also, which is really pulling the power of education, storytelling, history, crafts, and all that stuff back towards ourselves, so we can really understand the cultural relevance and a non-Eurocentric approach on education also. So we also do a lot of video work. So if you go to our YouTube, we have over 180 videos uploaded already of all sorts of topics, but largely around foodways, And so our vision was to grow this whole project. So we have a new building, and we're opening up a new restaurant in town with a new native concept. And then we're slowly moving into Montana, which will create new kitchens to do more work, because we're doing a lot of production work for schools and hospitals and manufacturing for large institutional culinary also. And that's how we see food access of happening more in real time. But eventually we'll open up a restaurant, which will create the jobs, move the food dollars to where we want it to, build the skills, and create a place for people to have the experience of sitting in a native restaurant with so much intention and being proud of it.
And Natives is the nonprofit.
Natives is the nonprofit.
It's an acronym.
Yep, North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems, because when you work in the nonprofit sector, you have to have an acronym for some reason. I think it's required.
Yeah, it's a legal
But I just
requirement.
prefer acronyms that say something so you can remember what they mean. So it just works that way.
When I talked to you in 2021, you were getting ready to open this restaurant, but you also said that you were seeing this kind of emerging wave in the culture of Native representation. And whether it is in something like literature with Tommy Orange and his book There,
Yep.
whether it is in TV and film with shows like Reservation Dogs, whether it's you with food, it feels like there has been a really big resurgence of attention and representation in media.
Yeah.
How are you feeling that is continuing or is being pushed back on?
Well, I mean, of course, there's pushback just because of the political situation that's happening in America today, but I feel like there's been so much amazing creativity and thought leaders coming out of this over the past decade and more, but I feel like it's really grown so much, and we're just seeing it more often, and we're starting to see more Native representation, in bigger spaces on larger platforms, and I think that's really important, and we're just happy to do our part to being able to work with this culinary scene and to be able to do a project like this, and for it to get a lot of recognition and attention. And it is changing the way people think about food, and that's what we wanted. We want people to see the beauty in the food. We want people to empathize and understand some of the hardships that a lot of Indigenous communities went through and are still facing today.
It seems like a lot of times the ingredients that grow locally, weirdly, people think about often as like a weed.
Yeah, I mean, because it's lazy. It's the education that we have, because if we taught kids the names of trees and plants, that education can go really far, because there's so much to learn about, because so much of the botanicals around us have meaning and have purpose, because plants give us everything. They can be food, they can be medicine, they can be crafting, they can be tools, clothing, lodging, weapons. They're a part of our spirituality, they're a part of our religions, they're part of our stories. It's everything to us, and we have so many plant relatives that have been here with our ancestors too, and there's so much to connect to with plants especially, And so I just feel like there's a better way for education, because just around this building, we put only indigenous plants around this area, and then we did a project where we just put the true names of the plants where they are. So you'll see the Dakota name, because that's the true name of the plant in that soil, and then an English descriptor and name so people can kind of walk around and have passive education.
I've been asking you a lot of questions that are kind of on the broader, big meaning societal scale, but something that's really special about food and flavor is that it often is such a tie to our own memories and to our own sense of place and home and comfort. What are some flavors that, for you, do that?
For me, I always go to choke cherries, just because we had them growing around us and we harvest them, and it's something that's really important and special to a lot of Lakota community. And so we would make a simple sauce out of the choke cherries that we called wojapi, and we would have that on a lot of special occasions, and that's just something that reminds me of the smell of my grandmother's kitchen growing up. But there's lots of things, just running around the plains and the smell of sage in the dirt, and all that kind of stuff. Just those memories are always there, because I spent so much time outside. And so I just think, food does trigger a lot of memory, and we want to see our own foods just normalized for these next generations, so they just grow up always having it. So it's not just a couple of pieces, but many pieces, and on a daily occurrence, and not just special occasions.
Speaking of generations, you work with your family. Your son is in the kitchen
That's
right
true,
now working.
yeah.
When you were raising your son, and when you're thinking about other people raising their kids, What is it that you want them to think about when they are feeding their families, when they're choosing the ingredients and the dishes that they make?
I cook a lot at home, and so he grew up. I don't even think he realizes like how much like good food was around him growing up, you know. And I gave him the choice early on, is like, go ahead and have fast food if you want. Just think about what's in it. Like, you know, if you just look at a hamburger patty from a fast food restaurant, like, does that look like real food? You know, does that look like something that you want to really eat? You know, and so like I let him make his own decisions by just giving him some critical thought. You know, and so he hasn't touched fast food restaurants since he's probably like 4 years old or something like that, you know. And but again, like, it's his choice. Like, there's no rules. Do what you want. Like, everybody loves a In-N-Out burger or something on occasion, but like, would you want to live off of it, you know? And so it's just a matter of that. But I think it's important to normalize not only healthy food, but culturally relevant food. And there's so much more that we can be doing, you know. And I feel like America did a really good job of kind of bastardizing most cultures for so long, that now is a time where we're seeing such a shift with people really starting to reclaim their own cultural foods and bring it from their own perspectives. And that's what's going on with the indigenous communities too.
What would it mean to decolonize our diets and our plates?
To me, it's a positive motion towards the future, because I just like to compare the values of like what are the values of colonization, you know, and they're not great, you know, because it's a lot of division, it's a lot of dehumanization of people of color, it's a lot of blatant land theft to rip out resources to make somebody really rich and everybody else work really hard. And then you compare indigenous communities, and there's so many amazing values of really being community-based, really focusing and making sure that everybody has enough food to eat, really focused on passing down traditions, understanding the respect that it takes to live with our environment and understand that we're a part of the environment. And we can find those values across the world, because colonization didn't just happen to Native Americans in the United States, because it's everywhere. You know, it's North America, Central America, South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. Everywhere in the world colonization has been, and it's still happening, because we're seeing colonization in places like Gaza, Ukraine, Congo, the Amazon, and it's constantly happening still. Like, we've never exited a period of colonization in human history yet.
One of the things that you're voicing here is that there actually is a solution, and it's a very old solution. It's a way of living that has existed, that we need to think more about using those techniques, those skills, that mindset in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're getting a lot smarter as humans, you know. I think we have a lot of challenges in front of us, but I feel like the more that we're able to talk to people on a direct basis, to have real conversations, to get away from the political theater, to get away from all of this noise coming at us from all these manipulating media that's out there, and just to really focus, like, what do we really need? You know, like, we need clean water, you know, and we're going through water crisis, and we need to come up with solutions so we're not just wasting water or giving it all away to corporations so they can stay rich. Like, we need ways to kind of protect some things, and natural resources, like, there's a lot of talk about selling off tons of public lands, which is just a continuation of colonization, just selling off land to make money, just to see it destroyed for whatever resources, whether it's mining or lumber or whatever it might be. But it's just going to leave those areas in disrepair for generations to come. You know, so we really need to focus on, like, what do we really need as humans to come together? You know, and we need food, we need water, we need a better understanding of our own education system. You know, and we need to be taught things that matter. When we shouldn't be afraid of diversity. You know, we shouldn't be afraid of people if they're different from us. We should be embracing that diversity and trying to pull it together.
There's often this real disconnect where people love to eat food from different cultures. They love to go to a restaurant that serves tacos or serves an authentic cuisine from another place, but then they don't love to care for the people who are making that food, or the people where the food comes from. And that feels like this really big, baffling disconnect to me in this moment. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
It is, but, you know, historically and still today, the United States is still highly segregated, you know, and communities intentionally build their own community around themselves, you know, but especially white community has historically kept out a lot of people of color, and they've had a hard time to understand or even find space to like really connect, you know. But like, I've lived in Mexico, and when you're just in Mexico, like, sure, there's bad things that happen in every country. There's cartels and there's, you know, political stuff going on. But I feel like when you just learn to talk to people, learn to be with people, you see the beauty in everything, you know? And like, again, it's like touching base with people as a human. And I feel like we need more of that. And food is such a great way to pull us together, because food is something we all have in common. Food is something we can always talk about with each other and share with each other.
Well, Sean Sherman, thank you so much for being on the show. It's an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of How to Be a Better Human. Before you go, please click the like and subscribe button to get alerts on inspiring TED Talks and interviews. You can also head over to Ted's own podcast channel, the TED Audio Collective, where we publish even more video podcasts. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.